The prodigal son was back. Isabella Rossi's long-lost love had returned, and he was here to kick me, the imposter, to the curb. That night, I packed my bags and fled. The contract was written in black and white, the terms seared into my brain. Upon the return of the principal party, the stand-in's role is terminated. I couldn't afford the breach of contract penalty. But I'd barely stepped off the plane, my feet not yet steady on foreign soil, when a group of men in black suits politely invited me into a blacked-out Cadillac Escalade. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, I saw her. Isabella Rossi. She was just as I remembered, devastatingly beautiful, with an icy composure that could freeze hell over. Her custom-tailored black suit traced the sharp, elegant lines of her body, and she radiated an unapproachable power that was her signature. But the inferno I'd never seen before was blazing in her phoenix-like eyes, which were usually as calm as a frozen lake. "Leo," she said, her voice quiet but as cold as steel. "Who gave you permission to run?" I raised my hands in a gesture of innocent surrender. "Ms. Rossi, Julian Croft is back. Our contract is automatically terminated. I was just trying to get out of your way, proactively rolling myself out of the picture." "Rolling yourself out?" A chilling smile touched her lips. She picked up a coil of rope from the seat beside her and, with practiced efficiency, began binding my wrists to the grab handle in front of me. Her fingers were cool against my skin, sending an involuntary shiver through me. I was stunned. "Ms. Rossi, what are you doing? This is kidnapping. It's a felony." Isabella ignored my protest, her hands moving with a practiced grace, as if she'd tied these knots 1,000 times. She leaned in close, her warm breath ghosting over my ear, but her tone was terrifyingly grim. "I'm going to give you one more chance. Go back to Chicago. Continue being Julian, or else." She paused, her gaze drifting slowly down to my legs. "I will break them and make sure you never walk out of this city again." My mind went completely blank. This woman, this titan of industry who stood at the apex of the corporate world, who never betrayed an ounce of emotion, was acting like a madwoman, trying to drag me back by force. Her perfect, idealized love, the man she'd mourned for 5 years, the man she'd paid me a fortune to impersonate, Julian Croft, was back. Shouldn't she be running to him, overjoyed? Shouldn't she be cutting all ties with me, the counterfeit, with surgical precision? Why? Why was she tying me up, staring at me with the eyes one reserved for a treacherous lover? The Escalade made a smooth, silent U-turn, heading back toward the airport's private terminal. My brain was a chaotic mess. My entanglement with Isabella Rossi began with an absurd contract. A year ago, my younger sister, Mia, was diagnosed with leukemia. She needed a bone marrow transplant and a mountain of cash for the treatments. Just when I'd hit rock bottom, Isabella's executive assistant, Sarah Jenkins, found me. She presented me with a contract and a photograph of Julian Croft. The man in the picture shared my features with an unnerving 90% similarity. The contract was simple. I, Leo Vance, would play the role of Julian Croft, becoming Isabella Rossi's nominal fiancé for 1 year. The compensation was $3 million. If the real Julian returned early, the contract would terminate, and I would receive a prorated payment. My job was to mimic everything about Julian: his mannerisms, his style of dress, his hobbies, even the precise curve of his signature. Isabella gave me a thick binder, a veritable Bible on the life of Julian Croft, which she had compiled herself. From it, I learned that Julian was Isabella's childhood sweetheart, the man her grandfather, the formidable patriarch Marco Rossi, had personally chosen to be her husband. 5 years ago, Julian had disappeared during a mountaineering expedition in the Himalayas. He was declared legally dead, but neither Isabella nor her grandfather ever truly believed it. The old man's health had failed in the aftermath, and the sprawling Rossi Enterprises was besieged by internal and external threats. Isabella's uncles were circling the CEO's chair like vultures. Forced to take the helm in a crisis, Isabella needed a Julian by her side to stabilize her ailing grandfather and placate the old guard on the board. And I was the lucky bastard, or rather, the tool, chosen for the job. I didn't have a choice. $3 million was the price of my sister's life. So I sanded down all my own edges, hid away my personality, and squeezed myself into expensive custom-made suits. I learned to drink the Blue Mountain coffee I hated and memorized Julian's favorite quotes from Nietzsche. I became the shadow of another man. For a year, I accompanied Isabella to galas and fundraisers, playing the part of a devoted couple. She would link her arm through mine, navigating the glittering crowds with effortless grace. In the dead of night, She would slump onto her office sofa, exhausted, and have me read her financial reports. Once, when I was fumbling through a golf lesson, she came up behind me, her hands closing over mine to adjust my swing. The warmth of her body seeped through my thin shirt, making my heart skip a beat. I saw her ruthless, decisive side in the boardroom, and I saw her vulnerability after a few glasses of wine, her eyes rimmed with red. She was the perfect employer, strictly professional outside of necessary public appearances, never crossing a line and never discussing anything with me that didn't pertain to Julian. When she looked at me, her eyes were always distant, as if she were looking right through me to someone else. I never forgot my place. I was a fake, a shadow. So, the moment Julian Croft returned, I didn't hesitate. The man looked so much like me, it was uncanny. The second he appeared outside the Rossi Tower, he caused a media frenzy. His clothes were worn, his face weathered by hardship, but his eyes were exactly as Isabella had described them, full of warmth and sunlight. He claimed he'd been buried in an avalanche and rescued by a local shepherd, suffering from amnesia for 5 years. He'd only recently recovered his memory and had fought his way back. The story was fantastical, but for Isabella, his return was undoubtedly the best news in the world. Through the blinds of her office window, I watched her sprint out of the building and throw herself into Julian's arms. The sun bathed them in a golden light, making them look like a painting. It was time for the shadow to disappear. I took the payment I was owed, left behind a thank you note, and booked the first flight out. I was heading to a place where no one knew my name, ready to start over. I thought it was the most dignified end to our arrangement. I never, ever imagined the ending would be this. Me, tied up and dragged back by her. The private jet landed in Chicago. I was escorted back to the sprawling Lake Forest estate I had called home for a year. Isabella untied the rope from my wrists, shoved me onto the plush sofa, and stood over me, her expression imperious. "Leo, what does the final clause of our contract state?" she asked coldly. I frowned, trying to recall the fine print. The party of the first part, Isabella Rossi, reserves the right of final interpretation. It was the boilerplate catch-all of every ironclad contract. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. "Good. You remember," Isabella nodded. "Now, allow me to interpret it for you. The right to terminate this contract rests with me, not with Julian's return. I say it's not over, so it's not over. You will right now, this instant, go back to being Julian Croft." I laughed, a bitter, angry sound. "Ms. Rossi, are you delusional? The real deal is back. He's right there in the flesh. What do you want me to play act for? For his benefit? You think he wants to see a man with his own face occupying his identity, sleeping in his? No, wait, living in his house and pretending to be his fiancé." My temper flared, and my words were laced with acid. Isabella's expression turned even colder. "You don't need to worry about what he wants. You only need to follow my orders." "No." I shot up from the sofa, confronting her with a defiance I had never shown before. "Isabella, I am not your puppet. I have my own life, my own dignity. My sister's surgery was a success. She's on the road to recovery, and I don't need your money anymore. This ridiculous game is over. I'm done." I turned on my heel, ready to walk out. "Stop." Isabella's voice came from behind me, threaded with a barely perceptible tremor. My feet froze, but I didn't turn around. An eternity of silence stretched between us, so long that I thought she had finally given up. Then, I heard her speak in a tone I'd never heard from her before, one of near pleading, of utter exhaustion. "Leo, please, I'm asking you, help me one last time." My heart clenched. In the year I'd known her, I had never seen her so humbled. She was always proud, always in command, as if nothing in the world could ever break her. I slowly turned back. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the fading light of sunset silhouetting her slender frame, making her look profoundly lonely. "Why?" I asked. "What's going on? Isn't Julian's return what you've wanted all this time?" Isabella didn't answer my question. She just looked at me, her eyes welling with red. "In 3 days, it's my grandfather's 80th birthday gala. I need you to attend with me." "As Julian? And the real Julian? Where have you hidden him?" "He's in a very safe place," she said, evading the question. "After the gala, our contract will be settled, once and for all. You can go wherever you want, and I swear I won't stop you." Her gaze was a storm of complex emotions, a plea for help, a steely resolve, and a deep, sorrowful note I couldn't decipher. My own resolve softened. At the end of the day, she was just a 27-year-old woman, forced to carry a corporate empire on her shoulders, fend off a pack of wolves in her own family, and care for an ailing grandfather. The Julian I portrayed was her only armor. Perhaps his sudden return had upended some crucial plan of hers. "Fine," I heard myself say. I'll do it. But this is the last time. The tension in Isabella's body seemed to melt away. A faint, fleeting smile touched her lips. It vanished in an instant, but it was like a firework, setting off a chain reaction deep inside my chest. Thank you, Leo. It was the first time she had ever said my real name with such genuine gravity. The next 2 days were deceptively calm. Isabella didn't mention Julian again, as if he'd never reappeared. She simply handed me a new file detailing Julian's fabricated experiences abroad over the last 5 years. Memorize this, she commanded. Grandfather will ask questions. I stared at the flawlessly crafted history, a sense of absurdity washing over me. The original was back, yet here I was, the stand-in, working overtime to learn an updated script covering his 5-year absence. What on earth was Isabella planning? And where was the real Julian Croft? 1,000 questions swirled in my head, but I knew this wasn't the time to dig for the truth. All I could do was play my part in this final act. Marco Rossi's 80th birthday gala was held at the old family estate, a magnet for the city's elite. Nearly every person of consequence in Chicago was there. Dressed in a white tuxedo, with Isabella in a matching white evening gown on my arm, we looked like something out of a fairy tale. Julian, you're finally back. The patriarch, his hair and beard snow white, was overwhelmed with emotion when he saw me from his wheelchair. Tears of joy streamed down his face as he gripped my hand, his clouded eyes filled with the relief of having found what was lost. Grandfather, I'm back. I'm sorry I made you worry, I said, delivering my line with the perfect blend of post-traumatic relief and guilt. I could feel Isabella's hand tighten slightly on my arm. During the party, Isabella's uncles, Robert and Richard Rossi, took turns trying to probe for weaknesses. Julian, my boy, what have you been through these past 5 years? You must tell us all about it, Richard said, his smile as sly as a fox's. Yes, we're all dying of curiosity, Robert chimed in. While you were gone, our dear Isabella was as faithful as a saint, turning down countless eligible young men for you. Their words were dripping with insinuation and ill intent. Remaining composed, I recited the story Isabella had prepared for me, complete with compelling emotion. From the avalanche and the rescue by a kind stranger to the subsequent amnesia and the arduous journey of rediscovering my identity. I spoke without a single misstep, painting a vivid and detailed picture. Marco Rossi nodded along, his gaze growing more affectionate by the second. Robert and Richard exchanged a look, unable to find a single crack in my story, and reluctantly fell silent. I knew my performance tonight was flawless. I had successfully helped Isabella stabilize her position, forcing anyone with designs on her CEO chair to temporarily retreat. Everyone knew that Julian was the patriarch's favorite, and as long as Julian was by her side, Isabella's power was absolute. Halfway through the gala, Isabella excused herself to the restroom, pulling me into an empty alcove. You did well, she murmured, a note of approval in her voice. Just part of the contract, I replied coolly. She studied me, her gaze deep and inscrutable. Leo, after the party, I'll transfer the rest of the money to your account, along with the penalty fee for the breach. You don't need to pay a penalty. We're terminating the contract amicably. No, I'm the one who breached it. Isabella shook her head. I was wrong to force you to stay. Her sudden apology left me at a loss for words. I started to say something, but a sharp, piercing voice cut through the party's genteel atmosphere. He's a fake. He's not Julian Croft at all. We snapped our heads toward the sound. A young man in a waiter's uniform was pointing at me, shouting at the top of his lungs. In an instant, every eye in the room was fixed on me. My stomach dropped. Like sharks smelling blood, Robert and Richard Rossi immediately rushed over. What are you talking about? He's not Julian? What proof do you have? The waiter fumbled in his pocket, pulled out a phone, and held it high, playing a video. The footage was dark, clearly filmed in some kind of basement. A man who looked exactly like me was tied to a chair, his mouth covered with duct tape. He was struggling violently, muffled cries of MMPH escaping him. His eyes were wide with terror and desperation. Though the video was blurry, everyone could see it. The man in the video and I had the same face. The room erupted. My God, there are 2 of them. The one in the video must be the real one. He's been kidnapped. Then who? Who is this one? Seeing the video, the old patriarch began to tremble with rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his lips quivering, unable to form a single word. You? Who in God's name are you? Triumphant smiles spread across Robert and Richard's faces. They flanked me, their eyes burning with menace. Well, Isabella, so you found an imposter to deceive your grandfather, to deceive all of us. Do you have any respect for this family? Talk. Where have you hidden the real Julian Croft? The accusations, the doubt, the fury, it all crashed over me like a tidal wave. I was speechless. Instinctively, I looked to Isabella, desperate for an explanation. But her face showed no trace of panic. Instead, she looked relieved, calm. She walked to my side, faced the stunned crowd, and took my cold hand in hers. Then she said something that turned me and everyone else in that room to stone. That's right. He isn't Julian. He's the man I love, Leo Vance. My brain shut down. The man she loves? Leo Vance? Is she talking about me? It wasn't possible. This was an act. It had to be. This was her desperate play to handle the crisis, throwing me under the bus as a new kind of shield. I felt her hand gripping mine, her palm slick with sweat, a slight tremor running through it. But her gaze was firm, resolute, without a hint of jest. Isabella, have you lost your mind? Robert shrieked, practically jumping in place. Grandfather is right here. How dare you admit to an affair with this imposter in front of everyone? What about Julian? Uncle Robert, I suggest you choose your words carefully. Isabella's voice was low, but it carried an authority that could not be challenged. I'll say it again. He is not an imposter. He is my fiancé, Leo Vance, and I am proud to have him here. As for the Julian you're so concerned about, her eyes flicked to the terrified waiter and the man imprisoned in the video. He is nothing more than a con artist, trying to use a passing resemblance to swindle the Rossi family. What? My mind spun even faster. She was calling the real Julian the fraud? What in the hell was going on? That's absurd. Richard bellowed. Grandfather watched Julian grow up. He'd know him in an instant. Is that so? Isabella's smile was glacial. She turned to the silent patriarch, her voice softening. Grandfather, do you remember? Julian has a butterfly-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder. He got it when he was a boy and fell out of a tree. You were the one who held him while the doctor pointed it out to you. The patriarch's eyes widened. It was an intensely private detail, something no outsider could possibly know. Isabella's gaze, sharp as a shard of glass, fell upon the waiter. Now, why don't you go ask the person who put you up to this to take off his shirt and show us all that birthmark? The waiter's face went white. The phone clattered from his hand to the floor. The color drained from Robert and Richard's faces as well. A dead silence fell over the room. Everyone understood. This wasn't some simple case of a mistaken identity. This was a meticulously planned conspiracy. Someone had found a look-alike to expose me, the fake, at the gala, hoping to discredit Isabella and weaken her grip on the company. But they had never calculated that Isabella would pull the rug out from under them, not by denying the accusation, but by admitting I wasn't Julian and turning the tables, branding their man the fraud. And that birthmark, known only to a precious few, was the fatal blow that shattered their lie. Seize him. Find out who's behind this. Isabella ordered the security guards. The waiter's legs gave out, and he crumpled to the floor. The crisis, it seemed, was over. I looked at Isabella beside me. She remained poised, as if everything was under her absolute control. But I knew it wasn't that simple. I didn't have a butterfly-shaped birthmark on my left shoulder either. If Robert and Richard had been quick-witted enough to demand I take off my shirt right then and there, Isabella and I would have been ruined. She had been gambling that they wouldn't dare, that their own guilt would make them hesitate. And she had won. But why would she do it? Why announce to the world that I was the man she loved? That went far beyond the scope of our contract. This performance was far too convincing. The shock of the evening was too much for the old man. He was taken to his room to rest, and the gala ended abruptly. The ride back to the estate was steeped in silence. I tried to speak several times, but the words wouldn't come. It wasn't until the car glided to a stop that Isabella finally spoke, her voice laced with exhaustion. Today must have been a lot for you. A lot doesn't even begin to cover it. I gave a weak, humorless laugh. I feel like I just got off the world's most terrifying roller coaster. My heart nearly beat out of my chest. Isabella, what are you thinking? The man in that video. That's Julian, she interrupted me, her voice flat. I froze. What? He really is Julian? Then, the birthmark. I made it up. My entire worldview shattered for the second time that night. She hadn't just publicly branded her long-lost love a fraud. She had used a complete fabrication to nail him to a cross of shame. It was ruthless. Why? I was completely bewildered. Why would you do that to him? Isn't he the one I cherished and mourned? Isabella finished for me, a self-deprecating smile twisting her lips. It was a smile full of bitterness and grief. Leo, the most deceitful things in this world are our own eyes. She turned her head, her gaze locking with mine, deep and penetrating. Because the Julian Croft who came back, she said, enunciating every word, is from head to toe a complete and utter bastard. In her study, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound books, Isabella finally laid out the whole, ugly truth. Julian's return wasn't some heartwarming love story. It was a calculated, vicious blackmail attempt. 5 years ago, he didn't disappear, she said, her voice eerily calm, as if recounting a story about strangers. He embezzled a fortune from a corporate project and ran off with a woman named Lisa. At the time, Rossi Enterprises was negotiating a major deal with an overseas consortium. That money was the initial capital, a massive sum. Julian, as one of the project leads, used his position to divert the funds into a secret offshore account. To cover his tracks, he staged the mountaineering accident. I was floored. This was more dramatic than any soap opera. The man she had described as warm, gentle, and perfect, her idealized lost love, was a common thief who'd abandoned her for another woman. Then, why didn't you go to the police? Why did you keep telling everyone he was just missing? Because of my grandfather. Her eyes reddened. His health was already fragile back then. He loved Julian like his own grandson. If he learned the truth, the shock would have killed him. On top of that, if word got out that the project funds were stolen, our stock would have plummeted. We would have faced bankruptcy. So, she chose to hide it. She shouldered the entire burden herself. She announced Julian was missing, used her own money to replace the stolen funds, and saved both the project and the company. For 5 years, she had propped up a teetering family empire while living a lie, preserving Julian's perfect image for the sake of her family. And I was the shadow she had carefully selected to give her grandfather peace of mind and silence the gossip. The binder you gave me, the one about Julian. Half-truths, she said with a bitter smile. The good parts were real. I didn't want to let those beautiful memories become so ugly. I finally understood. It wasn't that she had stopped loving him. It was that he had wounded her so deeply, she had no choice but to bury that love. That thick binder wasn't a training manual for me. It was a eulogy for her own lost youth. So his return now. He and that woman burned through the money overseas. Life got hard, so he decided to come back. Isabella's expression turned to ice. He thought I was still the naive young girl he could manipulate. He thought all he had to do was show up, and I'd welcome him back with open arms. He contacted me and demanded $100 million in hush money. If I refused, he'd expose the whole scandal and ruin the Rossi family name. I sucked in a sharp breath. The shamelessness was breathtaking. So you played along, I said, the pieces clicking into place. You pretended to agree, to keep him calm, while you waited for the right moment. A moment to utterly destroy his reputation and ensure he could never recover. Isabella nodded. He was arrogant. He thought as long as he held the past over my head, I wouldn't dare touch him. So he conspired with my uncles to stage that scene at the gala, thinking he could back me into a corner. He never imagined that was the very day I'd been waiting for. You want to send him to prison? No. She shook her head, a flash of venom in her eyes. That's too easy. I want him to be branded a fraud, to be despised by everyone. I want him to know that the face he's so proud of is worthless to me now. And you, she looked at me, you are the one I am willing to stand beside, openly in front of the entire world. I knew that last part was just a line, a strategic move she'd made at the gala. But hearing her say it again, here and now, my heart still hammered against my ribs. So what's your plan now? My uncles won't give up. They'll try to verify Julian's identity. They won't get the chance. A cold smirk played on her lips. I've already had him. Escorted out of the country. A flight that left tonight. Destination, some war-torn nation in Africa. I'll give him enough money to live out his days there. As for my uncles, without a body, all their accusations are just empty words. Clean, efficient, final. That was the real Isabella Rossi. I looked at her, a strange mix of emotions churning inside me. Pity, admiration, and something else. Something that felt dangerously like love. And me? I asked softly. My mission should be complete now, right? Silence fell in the study. Isabella looked at me, her gaze complicated. Yes, she finally said, after a long moment. You can go. The money will be in your account by morning. This was the ending I'd been waiting for. Freedom. A new life. So why, when the moment finally arrived, did my heart feel so hollow? It seemed. I was reluctant to leave. Reluctant to leave this woman who was as hard as ice on the surface, but whose heart was a fragile, tender thing. Okay. I nodded, pushing myself to my feet. I tried to keep my voice steady. Well, Ms. Rossi, take care. I turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling heavy and unreal, as if I were walking on clouds. Just as my hand reached for the doorknob, her voice came from behind me again. Leo. I stopped, but I didn't turn back. That line, he's the man I love. It wasn't entirely an act. Her voice was as light as a feather, but it landed on my heart with the force of a boulder. I practically fled the Rossi estate. Isabella's final words were a stone tossed into the placid lake of my mind, sending shockwaves through my entire being. Not entirely an act. How much of that was truth, and how much was fiction? I didn't dare to think about it. I didn't want to. We were from two different worlds. She was the queen in her castle, and I was just a kid from the wrong side of the tracks who'd sold a year of his life for a paycheck. The first rule of being a stand-in is that when the show's over, you walk away. No messy entanglements. I received the wire transfer. It was far more than the prorated amount, a sum large enough for Mia and me to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. I kept my promise to her, and we moved to a beautiful, quiet city in the South, Asheville, North Carolina. I bought a small house with a yard. Under careful medical supervision, Mia's health improved dramatically. The color returned to her cheeks. I found a simple 9-to-5 job. In my free time, I planted flowers in the yard and went for walks with my sister. Life was placid, an undisturbed pool of water. I deliberately avoided all news from Chicago, from Rossi Enterprises, from Isabella. I thought that if I just stopped thinking about her, that absurd year of my life would fade with time, eventually becoming a distant memory. I was wrong. Some people, some things, once they get into your heart, can never be erased. I jolt awake from a dream, her cool, elegant face flashing in my mind. I'd taste a certain kind of coffee and remember it was her favorite. I'd even glance at the cover of a business magazine and subconsciously scan the headlines for a familiar company name. I had to admit it. I was a goner. I had fallen in love with my former boss. The realization filled me with a sense of panic and helplessness. Life went on like that, quiet and unremarkable for 6 months. One afternoon, I was in the yard fertilizing a new rose bush when Mia ran out, holding her phone. Leo, look, isn't this your old boss? My heart seized. I took the phone. The screen showed a news alert, the headline stark and brutal. Rossi Enterprises in crisis. CEO Isabella Rossi indicted for corporate fraud. Faces prison time. The accompanying photo was of Isabella leaving a courthouse. She was dressed in a power suit, but her face was gaunt and pale, her expression defiant as a mob of reporters swarmed her. My chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible hand. The pain was sharp, suffocating. How could this have happened? I immediately tapped the link. The article explained that the fraudulent Julian, who had been exiled by Rossi Enterprises 6 months prior, had suddenly returned, backed by significant power. He presented a mountain of ironclad evidence, proving he was the real Julian Croft, and that Isabella had orchestrated the entire affair to steal the fortune that was rightfully his. This evidence included old photos of him with Marco Rossi, his school IDs, and even a cleverly edited audio recording of Isabella seemingly admitting to framing him. The most damning piece of evidence was his star witness, Lisa, the woman he had run away with. On the stand, she gave a tearful, compelling performance, claiming Isabella had paid her to stage the elopement, driven by jealousy over her relationship with Julian. The truth had been twisted, black turned to white. Public opinion flipped overnight. Isabella went from being a victim to a manipulative, vindictive woman who would stop at nothing to secure her power. And the real villain, Julian, was now painted as the wrong party, the perfect victim who had been betrayed and framed, winning universal sympathy. Robert and Richard Rossi had seized the opportunity, leading a boardroom coup to oust Isabella and throwing their full support behind Julian. Rossi Enterprises stock had nosedived. The company was on the brink of collapse. I stared at the news, my hands and feet turning to ice. Julian, that son of a bitch, he was back, and he hadn't just returned. He'd laid a vicious, elaborate trap to utterly destroy Isabella. And Isabella, how could she possibly face all of this alone? Leo, what's wrong? You look pale, Mia asked, her voice filled with concern. I snapped back to reality, dropping my gardening tools. Mia, book me a flight to Chicago. The fastest one you can find. Leo, you're going back. Yes. My gaze was unwavering. I can't let her face this alone. A year ago, I became her shadow for money. Today, I would become her sword for love. I would shatter this web of lies and filth. This time, it wasn't about a contract. It was because I loved her. Returning to Chicago felt like stepping into another lifetime. The city's glitz and glamour were the same, but all I felt was a biting, hostile cold. The first person I called was Sarah Jenkins, Isabella's assistant. Her voice on the phone was ragged and exhausted. We met at a coffee shop. Mister Vance, what are you doing back here? Sarah looked shocked to see me. How is she? How's Isabella? I cut straight to the point. Sarah's eyes immediately filled with tears. Not good. She lost the lawsuit, and the board forced her out. When her grandfather found out the truth, he had a massive stroke. He's still in the hospital. It's touch and go. And Julian, that monster, he's the acting CEO of Rossi Enterprises now. Every word was a knife twisting in my heart. The evidence, I asked. Julian's proof is all forged. Can't anyone see that? It's no use, Sarah said, shaking her head in despair. He was too well prepared. The audio recording was a deep fake, but it's flawless. The best forensic experts couldn't prove it was fabricated. As for Lisa, she was bought and paid for a long time ago. We can't find a single piece of evidence to counter their story. Ms. Rossi, she can't even go back to the estate. Julian had her thrown out. Where is she now? In an apartment on the outskirts of the city. A small place she bought years ago. I got the address and drove there immediately. It was a plain, old apartment building, a universe away from the magnificent estate in Lake Forest she once called home. I knocked for a long time before a hoarse voice finally answered from within. Who is it? It's me, Leo. The voice inside fell silent. A few moments later, the door creaked open a few inches. I saw Isabella. She had lost so much weight. Her eyes were sunken, her face as pale as a sheet of paper. A dead, defeated energy clung to her. She looked nothing like the vibrant, commanding queen she had once been. Seeing her like this, my heart shattered into a million pieces. She seemed stunned to see me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes that was quickly extinguished and replaced by a dull emptiness. What are you doing here? She asked flatly, her tone designed to keep me at a distance. Are you here to laugh at me? I'm here to help you. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was a mess. The curtains were drawn, and the air was thick with the smell of stale alcohol. Help me. Isabella let out a short, sharp laugh, as if I'd told the funniest joke in the world. How can you help me? Leo, have you forgotten who you are? You're nobody now. Get out of here. I don't want to see you again. She tried to shut the door. I blocked it with my body, my gaze locked on hers. Isabella, look at me. I forced her to meet my eyes. 6 months ago, you asked if I was scared. I'm telling you now, I wasn't scared. I was just furious with myself for being so stupid, for not staying to help you. And I hate myself for being so useless that I let you suffer through this alone. My voice trembled with emotion. Isabella stared at me, her eyes slowly filling with tears. I'm back now, I said, taking a deep breath. And I'm not leaving again. Whatever comes next, whether it's hell or high water, I'm with you. Her defenses finally crumbled. Like a lost, helpless child, she threw herself into my arms and began to sob, all the pent-up grief, injustice, and despair of the past months pouring out of her. I held her tightly, letting her tears soak my shoulder. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she whispered over and over into my chest. I'm the one who should be sorry, I murmured, gently stroking her back. My voice was soft but firm. Isabella, trust me. I will help you take back everything that belongs to you. From this day forward, Leo Vance was officially at war with Julian Croft. But it would take more than righteous anger to bring Julian down. I needed evidence. Hard, irrefutable proof that would destroy him for good. After her emotional release, Isabella became much calmer. She told me everything that had happened. Julian's rapid resurgence was backed by a key player, a foreign investment firm called Stonewall Capital. Stonewall had provided Julian with a vast supply of cash and connections, helping him forge evidence, bribe witnesses, and manipulate the media. What do you know about Stonewall Capital? I asked, sensing this was our best lead. Almost nothing, Isabella said, shaking her head. They're a ghost. Their methods are incredibly aggressive. I looked into them, but all I could find was a registration in the Cayman Islands. It's impossible to know who's really pulling the strings. Why do you think they're helping Julian? Profit. Isabella's eyes glinted with a spark of her old brilliance. I suspect their real target is Rossi Enterprises itself. Julian is just the pawn they've pushed onto the board. The hunter hiding behind the hunting dog, I said, understanding her meaning. If that were true, Julian was in a precarious position himself. The moment Stonewall devoured Rossi Enterprises, their puppet CEO would be the first to be discarded. Our enemy wasn't just Julian. It was a much larger, more dangerous shadow. The situation was getting more complicated by the minute. Right now, the most critical thing is to find Lisa, Isabella said. She's the only human witness in this case. If we can get her to flip, we have a chance to turn this around. Where is she? She vanished after the trial. Julian has her well hidden. Even the best hiding place leave a trail, I reasoned. She's a woman who loves luxury. She won't be content staying quiet for long. If we watch closely, we'll find her. In the days that followed, I used every contact and resource I had to track down Lisa. At the same time, I started digging into Stonewall Capital. Isabella, meanwhile, pulled herself together. She began reaching out to the old company loyalists, the ones who had been devoted to her and her grandfather, trying to rally support within the board. We were two engines running at full speed with a single, clear objective. The odds were stacked against us, but neither of us was ready to give up. During those difficult days, we lived in that tiny apartment, eating instant noodles, staying up all night analyzing the case, and watching the sun rise from the rooftop. Our hearts had never been closer. The employer and substitute dynamic was gone, the financial contract void. We were just two souls, finding warmth in each other, fighting side by side. One night, as we were poring over a mountain of documents, Isabella suddenly spoke. "Leo, do you regret it?" "Regret what?" "Coming back to this mess. You could have had a quiet, peaceful life." I put down the file I was holding and took her hand. "My only regret is not coming back sooner." I looked into her eyes, my voice filled with sincerity. "Isabella, I love you. Not Leo Vance, playing Julian Croft. Just me, Leo Vance. Loving you, Isabella Rossi." It was the first time I had ever said it so plainly. A beautiful blush spread across her cheeks. She leaned in and pressed a soft, gentle kiss on my lips. Me too. The moonlight streamed through the window, bathing us in its soft glow. In that moment, I felt that even if the path ahead led into a bottomless abyss, I wouldn't be afraid. A week later, we finally got a break. A friend of mine, a private investigator, located Lisa. Julian had set her up in a luxury hotel in Milwaukee, where she was living a life of extravagant excess. I didn't want to spook her. I chose a more direct and far riskier approach. I was going to see her myself, and I was going to make her want to help us. I went to her hotel alone. I found her in the lobby cafe, impeccably dressed in designer clothes, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was on top of the world. "Who are you?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion as she took in my face, Julian's face. "Who I am doesn't matter." I sat down opposite her and slid a file across the table. "What matters is that I can give you what you really want." The file contained some internal documents on Stonewall Capital I'd managed to get my hands on. They weren't top-level secrets, but they were enough to show her the bigger picture. Lisa picked up the file, her expression skeptical. As she read, her face began to change. "What is this supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, leaning back in my chair and watching her coolly, "that you think Julian is your knight in shining armor? Don't be a fool. You, and he are both just pawns Stonewall is using to swallow Rossi Enterprises. The second the company is theirs, you two will be the first pieces of trash they throw away." "You're lying." Lisa's voice was sharp with emotion. "Julian loves me. He promised he'd marry me after he took back the company." "Marry you?" I laughed, a cold, mocking sound. A man who would abandon his childhood sweetheart for money? A man who would try to destroy the woman he once loved just for revenge? Do you really think a man with that kind of character is worth betting your life on? "Lisa, you're a smart woman. You know how stupid it is to pin your hopes on a man like that." My words struck her like a hammer. Her face paled. I knew she was wavering. I pressed my advantage. "Help us. Testify in court. Tell the truth. When this is over, Isabella will give you a sum of money large enough to live comfortably in any country you choose. Furthermore, she'll use her connections to get you a new identity. A clean slate. A chance to start over." I paused, locking my eyes on hers, my voice low and serious. "You have one chance. You can stay on this sinking ship with Julian, or you can climb onto our lifeboat. The choice is yours." I stood up, leaving my contact information on the table. "I'll give you 24 hours to think about it." After I left, Lisa sat in that cafe for a very long time. I knew I had won, because what I offered her wasn't some empty promise of love. It was tangible, real-world security and freedom. For a woman like Lisa, that was far more valuable. Sure enough, the next morning, my phone rang. I'm in. We had our trump card. With Lisa as our star witness, we immediately filed an appeal. On the day of the hearing, Julian's face was a mask of cold fury. When Lisa took the stand and, one by one, laid bare all of his dirty secrets, how he had bribed her, how he had forged the evidence, the courtroom erupted. The media narrative flipped again, this time for good. Julian went from being the perfect victim back to being the despicable con man and criminal he truly was. This time, there would be no comeback. The court overturned the original verdict on the spot, restoring Isabella's name and all her positions at Rossi Enterprises. Julian was arrested in the courtroom for fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. A long prison sentence awaited him. As we walked out of the courthouse, the sunlight was so bright it was almost blinding. Isabella squeezed my hand, her eyes red with tears, but her lips were curved in a smile. We had won. But before we even had a chance to celebrate, an even greater crisis loomed. The day after Julian's arrest, Stonewall Capital launched a hostile takeover of Rossi Enterprises. Using the shares they had quietly accumulated at rock-bottom prices when they were driving the company into the ground, combined with shares bought from smaller stakeholders, their ownership percentage was now dangerously close to Isabella's. They were the second-largest shareholder. Their true objective was finally revealed: to devour the company whole. A brutal battle for control of Rossi Enterprises had begun. Isabella called an emergency board meeting, trying to rally every ally she had to fend off the takeover. But Stonewall's assault was relentless, and their financial resources were far greater than we had imagined. We were losing ground, pushed to the very edge of a cliff. At our most desperate moment, Marco Rossi woke up. His body was still weak, but his mind was sharp and clear. He learned everything that had happened. He didn't blame Isabella. He only let out a long, weary sigh. Isabella, you did the right thing. Then, he made a decision that shocked everyone. He announced that he was transferring all of his shares in Rossi Enterprises, his controlling stake, to me, to Leo Vance. The news was a bombshell that rocked the entire Chicago business world. I, a virtual unknown, had become the majority shareholder of Rossi Enterprises overnight. Robert and Richard Rossi nearly had aneurysms. Stonewall Capital's takeover plan was dead in the water. With my shares combined with Isabella's, we held an unassailable majority. They had no path forward. The crisis was averted in the most unexpected way imaginable. In the private hospital room, I met with the patriarch. He looked at me, his gaze full of complex emotions. "My boy," he said, his voice raspy, "you've been through too much for this family." "Grandfather, please don't say that. I've made many mistakes in my life," the old man sighed. "But my greatest was trusting that animal, Julian. I pinned all my hopes on him," the patriarch continued, "and I failed to see that the one person who could truly lead this family, the one who could give Isabella happiness, was right in front of me all along." His gaze shifted to Isabella, full of love and regret. "It was my foolishness," Grandfather was confused. "I almost destroyed you, and I almost destroyed this family." "Grandfather, it's all in the past now," Isabella said, taking his hand as tears streamed silently down her face. "Yes, all in the past," he nodded, relieved. Then he looked at me, his expression solemn. "Leo, I'm entrusting the Rossi family, and Isabella, to you. Can you promise me that you will always take care of her?" I looked at Isabella, who was looking back at me, her eyes glistening. I nodded firmly, making the promise of a lifetime. "I swear." After the battle for control ended, Rossi Enterprises quickly stabilized. With my full support as the majority shareholder, Isabella initiated a series of sweeping reforms, cleaning house of all the parasites who had plagued the company for years, including her two uncles. Rossi Enterprises was reborn. Everything seemed to have settled into a perfect, happy ending. And yet, a mystery still gnawed at me. Who was really behind the enigmatic Stonewall Capital? Why go to such elaborate lengths? First backing Julian and then launching a hostile takeover. There had to be a deeper reason. Mike had told me this wasn't really over. By chance, while organizing some of Marco Rossi's old belongings, I came across a dusty, forgotten photograph. In it, 3 young men were smiling, their faces bright with optimism. One was a young Marco Rossi. The second was a man I didn't recognize. And the third. When I saw his face, I felt a jolt, as if struck by lightning. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The man was Jonathan Croft, Julian Croft's father. As far as I knew, Jonathan Croft had died in an accident when Julian was just a boy. It was one of the reasons Marco had always treated Julian like his own grandson. But in this photograph, he and Marco were clearly peers, close friends. A massive, terrifying theory began to form in my mind. I took the photo and went straight to Isabella. When she saw it, she was just as stunned. "What? What is this?" "I don't think Julian's father is dead," I said, my voice dry. "And I think the real man behind Stonewall Capital is him, Jonathan Croft." The theory was horrifying, but it was the only one that explained everything. "He's doing it for revenge," Isabella realized instantly, her face draining of color. "He believes the Rossi family wronged him, so he planned all of this. He sent his own son as the first wave, and when that failed, he stepped in himself to try and destroy us completely." This was the truth. The ultimate conspiracy, hidden in the deepest shadows. Julian had been a pawn from the very beginning, a piece in his father's vengeful game. Whether he succeeded or failed was irrelevant. The real hunter had been lying in wait the entire time, ready to deliver the killing blow. And we had almost died from that final strike. If Marco hadn't made the decisive move to transfer his shares to me, Rossi Enterprises would already be a memory. Will he give up? Isabella's voice trembled slightly. No. I shook my head, a cold light in my eyes. A snake like that, hiding in the dark, will always be ready to strike again. Then what do? We drag him out of his hole, I said, staring out the window. And then we end this. For good. I laid out my plan for Isabella. It was incredibly risky, almost like setting ourselves on fire to lure a moth. But it was the only way to force Jonathan Croft to show his hand. Isabella listened, silent for a long time. Finally, she looked at me, her gaze unwavering. Okay, we'll do it your way. 3 days later, Rossi Enterprises held a press conference and announced a piece of news that shocked the world. I, Leo Vance, was resigning from all my positions at Rossi Enterprises and transferring my entire majority stake, free of charge. The recipient of those shares was Julian Croft. The announcement caused an uproar. Everyone thought I had lost my mind. Isabella was dragged through the mud, with countless people calling her a foolish, love-struck idiot for agreeing to such a ludicrous decision. Only we knew the truth. We were playing a dangerous game of chess. We were betting on Jonathan Croft's greed and arrogance. I made a public statement, claiming I was doing it out of a guilty conscience, that I believed the Croft family deserved a stake in the company, and I was simply returning what was rightfully theirs. To make the performance even more convincing, I personally arranged for Julian's release from prison on compassionate grounds, and, in front of the entire press corps, engaged in a reconciliation of historic proportions. Julian looked at me, his expression a mixture of confusion, resentment, and the smug delight of a petty man who thinks he's won. He probably thought I was some kind of moral fool. He had no idea he was just a bait we were using to catch a much bigger fish. And sure enough, after we had displayed sufficient sincerity, Jonathan Croft finally emerged. Identifying himself as the president of Stonewall Capital's Asia-Pacific Division, he contacted us, requesting a meeting with me and Isabella to discuss the future of Rossi Enterprises. The fish had taken the bait. We met him in the top-floor boardroom of the Rossi Tower. The man behind it all. He looked to be in his late 50s, well-preserved, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, the very picture of a refined businessman. But behind those lenses, his eyes were as sharp and predatory as a hawk's. He saw me, and Isabella standing behind me, and offered a victor's smile. Mr. Vance, Ms. Rossi, a pleasure. I never thought we'd meet under these circumstances. Mr. Croft, the feeling is mutual, I replied evenly. Mr. Vance, your integrity is truly admirable, Jonathan said with false sincerity. My son was foolish and caused you a great deal of trouble. On his behalf, I apologize. An apology is unnecessary. Isabella's voice was as cold as ice. We only came here today to ask you one question, Mr. Croft. Why did you fake your own death all those years ago? The smile on Jonathan Croft's face froze for a fraction of a second before he composed himself. Ms. Rossi, I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. You don't. I slid the old photograph across the polished table. Then I suppose you won't recognize this, either. Seeing the photo, Jonathan's composure finally cracked. His face changed. You? How did you find this? The truth has a way of coming out, I said with a cold smile. Jonathan, stop the act. You've been scheming for decades, haven't you? All to get revenge for your own failures. Realizing his cover was blown, Jonathan finally tore off the mask, his face twisting into a snarl of pure hatred. That's right. It was all me, he spat, his voice thick with venom. Decades ago, if that old bastard Marco Rossi hadn't pulled his funding at the last second, I would have built an empire. He destroyed everything I had. He ruined me. So I vowed to ruin everything he cherished. It's called poetic justice. So you planned all of this? Isabella challenged him. You used your own son as cannon fodder, sent him to get close to me, to try and swindle my family out of its legacy? Huh, that useless brat. He creates more problems than he solves. Jonathan's eyes held not a shred of paternal love, only contempt. I thought he could take the company cleanly, but then you two had to get in the way. But it doesn't matter. In the end, Rossi Enterprises still fell into my hands. He burst into triumphant laughter, a wild, pathological sound that echoed in the sterile room. Is that so? I watched him, slowly raising a small digital recorder I'd been holding, because every reporter in the city just heard every single word of that. At that exact moment, the boardroom doors were thrown open. A flood of reporters surged in, a forest of cameras and microphones aimed at us, the flashes of their cameras turning the room into a strobing, chaotic spectacle. Jonathan Croft's laughter died in his throat. He stared in horror at the scene before him, the blood draining from his face. You set me up. Turnabout is fair play, I said calmly. I believe the phrase is hoisted by your own petard. The meeting, from the very beginning, had been a live broadcast streamed across the nation. Jonathan's confession, his ugly, vengeful motives, his entire insane plan. It was all out there for the world to see. He was finished. What awaited him wasn't just the judgment of the law, but the ruin of his name and reputation. The police arrived moments later and led away the ashen-faced Jonathan Croft. The farce was finally over. A feud that had spanned nearly a year, a conspiracy that had crossed 2 generations, had at last come to an end. Sunlight poured through the massive windows, filling the boardroom with a bright, warm glow. I turned and saw Isabella watching me. Her eyes were shining with tears, with relief, with gratitude, but most of all, with a love so profound it seemed to overflow. I walked to her and pulled her into my arms. "It's over," I said. "Yes," she whispered. "It's over." She rose on her toes and kissed me. Then she smiled. It was the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. There was no ice in it, no pretense, no exhaustion or defensiveness. It was a smile that came from her very soul, as brilliant as a summer flower, as warm as the spring sun. I knew that in that moment. She wasn't just saying goodbye to Julian, her so-called one that got away. She was closing the door on the dark, heavy past that had imprisoned her for so long. From now on, her life would be filled with nothing but sunlight and love. And me, Leo Vance,